Thank you. Thank you. Before I start on what I have to share with you today, I have some things that I want to say. I can remember about 8 years ago coming through those doors, pretty much a broken man after having gone through a recent divorce. But you know, throughout the years, I've always been able to come back to the Dharma. It's always supported me. It's always fed me. But what I want to say to you tonight is just 2 words. Thank you. Thank you for opening your hearts. Thank you for your kind words. You know, when I went into this 2-year teacher certification program, I'm saying to myself, man, you know, you're too old for that. You know, you may not even see yourself finish. You may not even teach your first class. But here I am. And you know, it feels good for me being here with people that I know that love me and support me. So once again, a deep bow to you. And I just want to say thank you. So what I had to share with you today, I call it crossing the abyss. It could be called coming home too, because that's what it's like for me being here today, is coming home. So earlier this week, you know, I was looking through my phone as I often do, just passing the time, and I came across a quote. The quote was, "The mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses it." Once again, the mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses it. This quote was offered by an Indian sage by the name of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaja, a Maharaj. And what I found out about him is he was a common man, but he was held in such high esteem that they gave him the Maharaj name, Great King. And as I read a bit more, it became apparent that what he was talking about was the psychological and spiritual distance that we sometimes find between our minds and our bodies. Now, I'd been pondering what I wanted to talk about for a while. And then I remembered a talk that I heard last month, and it was one of my colleagues, one of the people that I went through this program with. Her name's Annie, and she was looking at the duality of mind and body. And ding, 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 there was a bell that went off in my mind. I recall just how much I have lived in my own head, and that seldom would I think about my body unless I'm exercising, trying to lose weight, playing some sport, or I'm ill or injured. And pondering that, another thought came to my mind. Now, this was a quote by Jack Kornfield. Actually, it was a quote from James Joyce's series of short stories called The Dubliners. The quote is, "Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body." Yeah, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. Wow. That's the way that I've lived for much of my life, a short distance from my body, and indeed caused me great suffering. Yet it also offers an opportunity for me in my practice to see more clearly just how important this journey between our minds and our bodies really is. Now, as a very young child, I lived with many, many stories going on in my mind. An interesting thing about these stories was, as they appeared in my mind, I thought they were the absolute truth. I believed that if I thought it, it must be true. Perhaps some of you've had that experience. I don't know. I lived many years thinking that I just didn't measure up. There must be something wrong with me. I wasn't good enough. I believe that this came from knowing that my mother had taken me to her aunt and uncle so that she could finish college. What I saw in my mind was that she gave me up. So there must be something wrong with me. My young mind had omitted many details and crafted this negative story about myself. Now, my aunt and uncle, they held or they set very high standards, and I stretched in trying to reach those standards. It seemed that no matter how well I did, I just couldn't measure up. Throughout my youth, my mind was working overtime, creating stories that I carried with me for many years. At that time, I had no understanding that creating stories was just what the mind does. Just as the salivary gland secretes saliva, the mind creates stories. I was indeed living in my head, a short distance from my body, and I lived in this place for many years. I became attached to this way of thinking. And as a result, I did suffer. This suffer created distance between me and my loved ones, me and my parents. I experienced much loneliness, mental anguish, and developed an addiction to alcohol that separated me from myself. So I won't bore you with more details. I just want you to know that it was a hell of a journey. So now that we know that one of the mind's major jobs is to create stories, and that these stories have a way of separating us from this precious present moment, where then can we go to find our way back to the here and now? Shall we cross what the Indian sage called the abyss? Shall we cross that psychological and spiritual distance from our heads to our bodies? Let's think about that. Let's take a closer look at that process. Currently, I'm studying the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This study has opened my eyes as to just how important it is to make this short journey from my mind to my body. In this sutta, the Buddha, speaking to his followers, say the 4 foundations gives us the direct path for purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the true way, and the realization of nibbana. Nibbana. Let's do that again. The 4 foundation gives us the direct path for purification of being, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the true way, for the realizations of nibbana. Wow. So what are the 4 foundations? And what I want to do, I'm not going to into a lot of detail with you tonight, but perhaps just what I share with you will create some curiosity, and perhaps you will look on your own. But the 4 foundations are contemplation of the body, including breath, contemplation of feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, contemplation of mind, and contemplation of mind objects or contemplation of dhammas. These include the 5 hindrances, And by the way, one of those hindrances was my companion for a lot of years, doubt. The 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, and the 7 factors of enlightenment, and last but not least, the 4 noble truths. So today, I'm just focusing on the first foundation of mindfulness, contemplation of the body. Through my practice, I've learned many things, supporting the body as the basis for our present patient self-control, restraint, and tolerance. It's always, always our way home. We were just talking about it in the beginner's instruction, our way home, coming to the body. In our practice, it doesn't matter how much we're distracted, how our thinking might just sweep us away. We can always come home to the body. The Abhidharma says that the body is the soil which understanding grows. Coming to the body calms and grounds the mind and heart and can lead us to produce wisdom and happiness. Yet, this body, our bodies are so fragile, so very vulnerable. It can be broken, squashed, scraped, scathed, burned, and worn away. It is indeed impermanent. Further, you know, it's really interesting that science tells us that not a single cell that existed in our bodies in our infancy exists today. So is it possible that that image that we saw in our mirror this morning is someone new? Someone always evolving, ever changing? This body, although fragile, impermanent, and ever changing, is also magnificent. According to Norman Fisher, in the July issue of Lion's Roar, that's July 2004, he underscored just how important the body is to our practice. He says that the body has its own intelligence. It is a magnificent process, a ceaseless flow, a journey itself. Now, I realize that I'm very fortunate, and most of us here are. But some people have difficulty with these things. But without thinking about it, our hearts beat. Our lungs expand and contract. Blood flows, surges through thousands of miles of capillaries and arteries and veins, nursing muscles and organs. And when sense organs are stimulated, a world springs into view. Chemical and electrical reactions in the brain and nervous system give rise to thoughts, emotions, intentions, and experiences. Without making any complicated or belabored effort, we can naturally desire, move, and act in this world. I said that we're fortunate. Because isn't it interesting that I can tell my body to jump and it will? I can tell my body to stand and it will. I can tell my body to walk and it will walk. And yet I have no idea how to tell it to digest the food I eat. Or if I cut my finger, I can't tell it to stop bleeding. I can tell it to conquer some disease, and it might attack that disease. But it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm telling it. Further, Norman Fisher stated that the body is a vehicle for life's flow. It is ruled by life. determined by life much more than it is ruled and determined by me. As a matter of fact, I can't even find the me that I call myself. Again, this body is impermanent. It will cease. Although the body has breathed, indeed, it will cease. Life will no longer flow through it. The last breath will find its way out of our bodies, releasing that which our bodies no longer need. And it will find its way home. It'll find its way home to trees and plants that are nourished and supported by our breath. It's definitely a journey of return. Our bodies will also return home. Just as indicated in the Satipatthana Sutta, when this so-called lifeless body is left for a period of time, it will find its way through the stages of decay. It will find its way home. It will return to the elements from which it and all living beings come: earth, water, fire, and air. It is still filled with life as it nourishes the earth and life on the earth. It will return home. This is not dissimilar to our practice. Just as I initially stated, regardless of where our thoughts take us, we can always find our way back to our breath and our bodies. We can always find our way back home. So, I no longer live a short distance from my body. And if I go there, I know my way back. Spiritual practice, just as life itself, it's always a practice of return. So, what I'd like to do for the next 5 minutes is for us to drop from our minds to our bodies. And let's do what the Buddha says. The best way to learn is through direct practice. Let's prepare ourselves for meditation once again. We can do this for just 5 minutes. So find a posture that's comfortable and yet alert. And you once again can begin by focusing on your breathing. And let us take this short 5-minute journey together. Doing this reminds me of a snow globe that we shake up. And as we watch the snow, it just comes to rest on the floor of the dome. Like that, let's allow our awareness to come from our heads to our bodies.